When I was only 16 years old, my parents convinced me to visit my grandmother, who lived in a remote village, about 40 miles from the nearest town. The first day in the village didn't go very well, but I was excited to see my beloved grandmother after not seeing her for about 4, maybe even 5 years. Grandma was overjoyed to see me and hugged me tightly as soon as I got out of the car. After laying out my things in the room she had prepared for me, Grandma insisted on dragging me into the kitchen and feeding me freshly baked pies. I vividly remember that scorchingly hot day when the sun was mercilessly scorching, almost mocking my body while I was fighting the heat. After a hearty breakfast, I took off my shirt and remained only in shorts, wearily making my way to my grandmother's vegetable garden, not forgetting to grab a shovel. For some reason, Grandma seemed worried and suggested that I rest first before digging in the garden. But being a true gentleman, I politely declined and, putting on a cap to protect myself from the sun, headed to the backyard, where there was a fairly large vegetable garden. I can't remember how much time I spent digging in the ground, but when my grandmother came up to me, felt my forehead and offered to go to the river to rest, I realized that I had overextended myself with help. Looking at my wristwatch, I was convinced that it was already noon and there was plenty of time for active recreation. After packing my things, I said goodbye to my grandmother and headed for a small river, about half a mile from our village. To get to the river, I had to walk along the main and only street of the village, and then through the dense forest in which the old cemetery was located. I remembered going there as a child with the local kids, exploring the neighborhood. I also remembered how older children used to scare us at night by the campfire, telling creepy stories that sent shivers down my spine, and I hurried home with my friends. Oh, how I longed for those carefree summer days when we sat around the campfire, played hide and seek in the woods, swam with friends in the river and ventured to climb the old swamp. Pausing for a moment, I looked around the area, and a rusty iron fence appeared on the right side of the path. After taking a few steps back, I looked at the impressive arch with the inscription "Cemetery" written on top in twisted wire letters. I found myself smiling for some unknown reason. My gaze wandered behind the archway where the old graves lay. Some of the crosses were on the verge of overturning, and despite the fact that it was summer, the crows were sitting on them, not hurt at all. Broken statues, fallen crosses, cracked tombstones and other dilapidated elements complemented the eerie atmosphere, sincerely causing me a feeling of awkwardness. A cool summer breeze blew, intensifying the eerie atmosphere, and I immediately felt the desire to move away. However, when I tried to take a step, I felt enchanted, as if under a spell. My heart beat 5 times faster, my knees weakened, and my hands trembled violently. It was an inexplicable fear that gripped me, making me tremble like a child. But my fear was not in vain. Suddenly, someone forcefully pushed me from behind, pushing me towards the terrible arch. I couldn't hold back a loud, startled exclamation. Caught off guard by the sudden jolt, I lost my balance and tripped over a protruding metal pin, falling to the ground with a muffled sigh. The impact shook my whole body, sending vibrations through my organs, like the strumming of a guitar. A buzzing sound filled my ears, and before I could turn around, the creaking iron door slammed shut with an ominous screech, sealing me inside. I exclaimed hoarsely, feeling a mixture of anger and confusion. I couldn't understand why anyone would want to make such a cruel joke on me. An infuriating sense of betrayal washed over me, as if someone at home was mocking me. Shaking off the dust from my clothes, I once again looked at the arch, trying to open it with a sharp movement, but my efforts were in vain. The hinges must have rusted, which is why it jammed, I thought, making several more unsuccessful attempts to free myself. It became clear that I needed to find another way out. After taking another look at the area, I threw the basket over a surprisingly low fence and thought about climbing over it. However, I noticed that the fence was overgrown with bushes, branches and grass. A wave of disgust swept over me, fueled by my intense fear of insects. Who knows what could be hiding in these thickets? Bees, wasps, bumblebees, ants, earwigs, spiders, just thinking about them sent chills down my spine. Ugh, it couldn't be worse. I muttered angrily, quickly abandoning my plan to climb over the fence. Instead, I decided to explore the cemetery, hoping to find another way out. For the next 2 or 3 hours, I wandered aimlessly through the creepy cemetery, gradually losing hope of finding an escape route. The sun began to set, turning everything around in a blood-red hue and bringing coolness into the air. Shivering, I sat down on a dilapidated bench, wrapped my arms around myself and rubbed my shoulders to warm up a little, although it turned out to be in vain. Suddenly I heard a bench creak next to me, as if someone had joined me without warning. Startled and ready to scream, I slowly turned my head towards the source of the sound. To my surprise, there was a man sitting next to me. I shuddered with a mixture of fear and curiosity, trying to get up, but he gently stopped me with a light touch of his hand on my shoulder. "Why are you so scared? Did you see a ghost or something?" The man spoke in a surprisingly pleasant voice, removing his hand and leaning on the bench. He looked to be in his 30s, he had dark brown hair and a long black cloak that looked like a mantle. His light green eyes radiated an inexplicable aura. Meeting my gaze, he smiled and added, "I'm Victor. I am the caretaker of this cemetery, making their rounds. I noticed you sitting here and thought you might be lost." Stunned and unable to come up with an answer, I suspected something was wrong. "Could you come in for a cup of tea? I'm pretty lonely here," Victor suggested, looking up at the sky. There was some subtext in his words that I couldn't quite grasp. Despite all my sound judgment, I could not bring myself to refuse his offer. Nodding and smiling faintly, I moved closer to Victor, and together we headed to his small one-story house. "I'm glad you agreed. Otherwise, I would have spent another lonely night," he said with a grin that made me wonder about the true meaning of his words. I had no idea that the next day my grandmother would call the police after my departure. A patrol consisting of 4 officers and 2 police dogs went to the cemetery in search of me. In the end, they found my almost lifeless body lying near a high rusty gate. The officers acted quickly, taking me to the hospital, where doctors worked tirelessly to save my life. It was a hair's breadth from death. I had a spinal fracture in 2 places, both lower ribs were broken, open fractures of the joints of the hands and dislocation of the jaw. The injuries were severe, and as a result I was permanently disabled. This incident caused shock in the community. The news of my unfortunate meeting at the cemetery spread, causing whispers and speculation. Some believed it was a deliberate act, a malicious force targeting an innocent little boy. Others dismissed it as a tragic accident, an unfortunate combination of circumstances. Nevertheless, this incident left an indelible mark on me, both physically and emotionally. In the heart of the forest, among the tall century-old oaks and pines, surrounded by waist-high grass and a mysterious swamp, a hidden lake awaits you. Its crystal-clear waters wash the emerald shores, and the reeds hide flocks of ducks in their depths. White water lilies bloom like delicate brides, emitting a subtle fragrance that attracts agile dragonflies. At night, moonlight covers the surface of the lake, while the stars twinkle softly in the midnight silence. In the morning, thick fogs envelop calm waters, lulling chatty frogs to sleep until dawn. However, the serene beauty of this charming reservoir began to attract more and more visitors in search of solitude and peace of mind, including a young girl named Emma, a resident of a small village on the edge of the forest. With a smile on her face, Emma often came to the lake, sat on the shore and from time to time sang playful songs in her childish voice. Picking strawberries in the forest, she washed the fragrant berries and put them in a wicker basket. Before leaving, as a sign of gratitude, the kind-hearted girl always left a handful of berries on a lily pad near the shore. One day Emma didn't come alone. She came out of the forest with a backpack in her hands and headed to her favorite place under a weeping willow. Its branches created a protective canopy, protecting her from the scorching summer sun. A man was following her from the depths of the dense forest. His face was dark as night, and his eyes were scarier than the darkest nightmare. He had a creepy look, reminiscent of the look of a wild beast stalking its prey. As he made his way through the reeds, he tried to avoid Emma's eyes, clutching a ball of twine in his hands. Panting as if from thirst, he rushed at Emma, who barely had time to cry out before the man dragged her into the lake. For a long time, the wind rustled in the treetops, lamenting the absence of Emma's sweet voice. The laughter of the playful children on the shore stopped. Only the evil man became a common sight. He sat on the roots of an ancient pine tree, peering into the dark surface of the lake with sinister eyes. He saluted him, for his soul, black as a nest of poisonous snakes, gnawed at him from the inside, whispering, "Kill! Kill more!" His brow furrowed and his hands trembled. When he returned to the lake again, the man's ferocity increased. He harbored evil intentions, hiding in the juniper bushes, waiting for his next victim, whose weak footsteps were already heard nearby. A little boy, about 8 years old, got lost in the woods and was screaming looking for his mother. Under the merciless rays of the midday sun, the man died of thirst. Looking for a break in the shade on the shore, he dipped his hands into the water to drink when his gaze fell on a handful of bright blue berries lying on a lily pad. Their beauty and juiciness attracted him. The hungry man grabbed a lily leaf, tore it off and greedily ate the delicacy. When the sun began to set, the tearful boy ventured to the shining lake and settled down on the weathered roots of an old tree. Coming out of the bushes, a little girl came up to him, gently hugged the child and calmed his sobs. Exhausted by many hours of wandering through the forest, the boy felt unbearable hunger. Looking around, he noticed dark blue berries scattered on the ground. "Don't touch them," the girl warned. "They are poisonous, known as crow's eyes. They strike at the very heart and can stop it forever." Taking the boy by the hand, the girl led him away from the treacherous berries to the edge of the forest. From there they could already see the village, and the desperate cries of the boy's mother echoed in the distance. With a gentle smile, the girl handed the hungry boy a full bag of strawberries. After taking one last look at the village, she sighed sadly and disappeared into the thickets of wild sagebrush. I have a younger sister named Emily. One day, when Emily was in first grade, and I was in seventh, I came to pick her up from school, and she was in tears. Worried, I approached her teacher and asked why Emily was crying. The teacher explained that at the beginning of the school year, her classmates conspired against her and subjected her to bullying. Today, the main bully, Jack, put a brush in his ear, and the blame fell on Emily, since it was her brush. When I got home, I sat down next to Emily and tried to comfort her. She expressed a desire to take revenge on her tormentors. Surprised, I asked how she knew about such a vindictive act. Emily said that it was suggested by her imaginary friend Lily. Lily was the name of her favorite doll, which she carried everywhere with her, even to school. I understood that Lily was just a figment of her imagination. As time went on, the behavior of Emily's classmates became more and more strange. They started sticking scissors into their hands, drawing red crosses on their palms, and one of them even scrawled "Emily, I'm sorry" on his hand. Gradually, the bullying towards Emily decreased, but an alarming transformation was taking place inside her. She became more and more violent. The situation escalated to such an extent that Emily even attacked our dad, trying to pull out his hair in response to his harmless teasing. Our parents had to go to the hospital for a week, and I was left alone with this miracle. We started sleeping in separate rooms, and at night I could hear Emily talking to someone. However, on that particular night it was quiet. When I went to check on her, she was nowhere to be seen. When I returned to my room, I noticed Emily standing in the hallway, fully dressed, with a key in her hands and her Lily doll. She seemed to be heading outside with her back to me. She started to unlock the door, but I didn't stop her. Why? Because I was scared. Emily had never behaved like this before. As soon as she went outside, I realized what was going on and hurried after her. We lived near the forest, and Emily ran away into its depths. On the way, she deliberately dropped Lily's doll at my feet. It was terrible. How could she throw away her favorite doll like that? No, my sister would never do that. I noticed that Lily's eyes were gouged out and a smile was painted on her face with a pen, but I didn't dwell on it and continued to pursue Emily. In the forest, I lost my balance and ended up in a swamp, calling for help. A young man came to my aid and called the police. I told him everything that had happened. The next morning they found Emily unconscious, bleeding from her mouth for some unknown reason. After her stay in the hospital, everything seemed to be back to normal. Emily seemed to have forgotten about these events and became kinder and more sociable. Until she transferred to another school and the bullying cycle started again. History repeated itself. Once I was selling postcards at my dacha and there was only one street left, the last one, Behind it there was only a huge swamp and forest. I didn't really like this street, it was creepy on it, broken windows, abandoned houses, devastation and trash. I thought that most likely I wouldn't meet anyone, but I just somehow wanted to walk around the sights. While I was walking, I noticed deep scratches on the iron fences. I thought people got drunk and here you are. I came to the end of the street. Our cottage is fenced, but I noticed a big crack with drops of blood on the edges. I decided to take a walk in the woods behind the fence. Suddenly I will find mushrooms. I'm walking, I'm humming a song to myself, and suddenly someone is standing in the distance of the path, all pale, about 4 meters tall and arms and legs are bent somehow wrong. I was very scared and backed away. The creature was standing with its back to me, but when I climbed over the hole in the fence, I touched the edge with my hand and there was a crash and the creature looked right at me. I rushed to my street. I ran and constantly looked back. It seemed to me that the creature was chasing me. In the end, I didn't see him. Then she stopped, took a break and walked further down my street. It always seemed to me that someone was looking at my back. Finally I got to my property and locked the gate with all the locks. I told my parents everything and no one believed me. At night I was constantly looking out the window. At night I slept like a log, but I was woken up by the eerie sound of scratching on the fence. I sat down on the bed, turned on the light and began to cry. In the morning I went out to the site and looked at the fence and was stunned. The fence was all scratched and written in blood, "I'll find you in a year." And now a year has passed and I hear someone scratching the front door again and I'm scared. An elderly woman carrying the burden of many years walks slowly but confidently along the path, her long skirt rustling with every step. Not a single blade of grass seemed to bend under her feet, as if she was gliding in the moonlight, trying not to disturb the peace of the night inhabitants. Only the old owl noticed her and respectfully bowed her head in greeting. She held a staff in her hand, but not for support, rather, it seemed to dispel the night fog that clung to her feet, preventing her from moving forward. The fog, like a faithful companion, playfully touched her feet, running away from time to time, but always returning. As she approached her old, blackened hut, which stood pressed against a tall pine tree as if they were intertwined, the woman quietly disappeared into the darkness. Almost instantly, a light came on in the tiny window. The man gasped, stunned by the sudden wave of pain, and clenched his teeth. Each step was difficult, the agony echoed in his crippled leg. He was struggling through thorny bushes, his clothes were heavy from the morning dew, which aggravated his discomfort. The knight slowly retreated into the depths of the forest, looking for a secluded place to wait out the day like a hunted animal. The sun's rays put an end to the knight's torment, gently caressing the cheeks of the exhausted man. Soon he found himself standing in a small clearing, flooded with light, and looking with surprise at an unfriendly black hut peeking out from behind an old tree. Unable to bear the pain any longer, the man collapsed on the porch and lost consciousness. Slowly, but persistently, warmth seeped into his frozen limbs, reviving his exhausted body. Overcoming drowsiness, the man raised himself on his elbows and looked around. He was lying on a wooden bench, tightly wrapped in cowhide, and a bundle of hay served as a pillow for him. The room was dimly lit, filled with the scent of dried herbs and flowers. Only one small splinter was burning, casting enough light to make out the unique decoration of the hut. There was a minimum of furniture. In the center there was a round table decorated with intricate carvings and a chair. There were 2 benches along the walls, a traditional stove and a chest of drawers with drawers. The chest of drawers, charmingly antique, attracted me like a magnet. It was tall, its drawers, darkened by time, gleamed with polish, it seemed to have been transferred from another era. Inside were mismatched jars, vials and boxes, their mysterious contents were hidden by dust and cobwebs. Garlands of dried plants hung from the ceiling like cobwebs. This unfortunate movement reminded the man of his wounded leg, and he threw back the cowhide that served as a blanket for him. A thin gauze wrapped around his leg from ankle to knee, emitting an unpleasant smell. Traces of the drug stained the fabric in a greenish shade, in which there was no blood. The trap into which the unfortunate man fell left a deep wound on his leg, which, although painful, was no longer as strong as a few hours ago. He looked around the hut impatiently for a jug or a bottle of water. Since there was no one in the hut yet, and the owner, who had provided him with invaluable help, seemed to be absent. He could not wait any longer and decided to try to get up. Carefully, so as not to lose his balance, the man got up from the bench, hardly transferring his weight to his injured leg, and headed for the door. He gritted his teeth in pain as he stepped out onto the porch and looked around. The dense forest stretched as far as the eye could see, its crowns casting shadows on the tall grass surrounding the hut. There was no sign of a vegetable garden or any cultivated plants. The man wondered how the owner of the hut managed to survive in such isolation. Coming down from the porch, the man limped around, inspecting the area. Suddenly his gaze stopped on something right behind a tall pine tree, and, unable to restrain himself, he let out a scream. Fear gripped him in a suffocating wave, and he stumbled backwards, turning around and running away. Ignoring the pain, he rushed through the thorny bushes and did not even slow down when he reached the swampy area. Wheezing and writhing in pain, he continued to run, ignoring the time, until darkness enveloped him. Eventually, he broke out of the forest and noticed lights ahead. It was a small village with 10 houses, an old mill and a dilapidated church, the walls of which were dilapidated by time and rains. Barely able to stand on his feet, the man hobbled to the nearest house and knocked on the window. Inside the house it was bright and clean. An elderly man with gray hair was sitting on a stool by the stove and mending bast shoes, while an old woman was weaving a braid for a little girl. The girl's parents looked curiously at the unexpected guest. The woman quickly brought him a mug of water, and he drank it greedily without raising his head. The young man noticed that the others were looking at him carefully. "What happened to you?" As if the devil himself was chasing you, the elderly man asked in an old but firm voice. Maybe he was, the man exhaled, trying to catch his breath. Yes, but the devil took the form of a woman. The old witch. At these words, Grandpa, who was sitting by the stove, abruptly put down his work and stood up. "Let's go outside, away from the children," he said in a serious tone. Going out on the porch, the old man lit a cigarette and, while saying this, stared intently towards the forest. "A witch, you say?" "Yes, that's right. She was terrifying." "What was so frightening about her? Did she have a tail? Maybe horns? Maybe hooves like a horse?" "No, nothing like that." "Was she dressed in dirty rags, or was she completely naked?" "No, not at all." "Did she fly on a broom? Or maybe she transformed right in front of your eyes?" "No, it wasn't like that." "Then why do you call her a witch? You ran away from her as if your life depended on it." Grandpa grinned. "I'll tell you why. This woman behind her hut is taking the lives of young children. I saw it with my own eyes. I climbed up a pine tree and saw that she was on her knees, holding a lifeless child in her arms. It wasn't breathing. And there were mounds all around. Graves. And crosses are placed on them. There are so many of them, and all are as small as children's graves. She has destroyed so many, tortured so many innocent children." The man sobbed, his voice was full of anguish, and he clutched his chest, momentarily unable to continue. The old man calmly stubbed out his cigarette and spoke with a hint of sadness. "Crosses, you say? It is interesting. Let me tell you a story. Half a century ago, a woman named Priscilla lived in our village. She was an ordinary woman, there was nothing remarkable about her. Her husband died in the war, and she was never lucky enough to have children. Priscilla had a passion for herbs and collected medicinal roots and healing flowers in the forest. She helped her neighbors by offering her help without asking for anything in return. Soon her healing abilities became known, and the whole community turned to her for help. One day a woman came from the city. She fell at Priscilla's feet, begging her to lighten her burden. She suffered not from her husband, but rather from the fear that her husband would reveal her secret and abandon her and their child. She offered Priscilla a large sum of money and promised to provide her with a new life in the city. However, Priscilla refused, saying, "I will not take such a sin on my soul. It will burden you in the future." And she sent the woman away. Time passed, and the incident was forgotten. But one day Priscilla found a baby lying on her doorstep, wrapped in a blanket and crying. The note accompanying the child read, "Here's your burden." Priscilla took care of the baby for a long time, but unfortunately, The baby eventually passed away. Undeterred, Priscilla took the baby and disappeared into the woods. The villagers never saw her again. However, a hut appeared in the depths of the thicket, and those who passed by knew that it belonged to Priscilla. Some villagers continued to visit her, bringing her children, some sick, others unwanted. She took care of them all, restoring them to health and returning them to the village. But those who could not overcome their illnesses, she buried in the forest, decorating their graves with crosses. The man squinted at his bandaged leg and shrugged, digesting the old man's words. "So you're saying the woman in the woods is Priscilla? But why did she scare me so much? Why did I run away from her?" The old man sighed, and there was a mixture of sadness and understanding in his voice. "You see, people were spreading rumors about her, accusing her of stealing children and hurting them. But in fact, it is the villagers themselves who bring the children to her. Some have neither the desire nor the ability to take care of them, so they take them to the forest, where Priscilla surrounds them with love and care. She returns those who survive their illnesses to the village, and she buries those who could not be saved with respect and decorates their graves." The man listened attentively, slowly comprehending the reality behind his meeting. The fear that had gripped him began to dissipate, replaced by a sense of remorse and guilt. The grandfather continued, "The crosses that you saw mean a completely different story. Priscilla bears the burden of those who could not survive, providing them with a final resting place and marking their presence with crosses. She has raised many children who now have their own families scattered all over the neighborhood. I'm one of them. My own mother, burdened with guilt, brought me to Priscilla. She took care of me, healed me, and when I was 2 years old, she brought me back to the village.